If you feel like you're overdue for a major change, but you keep circling the same decision, this is the video that I wish I had had 2 years ago. Writing this book didn't just clarify my thinking, it dismantled it. I thought I was writing about health, how to change your habits, how to take better care of yourself, how to stop making the same promises, and then ending up back in the same place 3 weeks later, wondering what happened. You know, light, cheerful material. But the deeper that I got into the research and the more that I reflected on 20 years in medicine and my own reinventions, the more obvious it became that health was only the visible layer. Underneath the habits, the self-sabotage, the starting and the stopping, there was something much more powerful happening. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. So in this video, I want to share the biggest things writing this book taught me about reinvention. The things that I didn't expect, the things that challenged me, and the things that may help you understand why you can want change so badly and still find yourself hesitating at the edge of it. So let's start with the first thing that I learned. Reinvention usually begins long before you call it reinvention. It doesn't feel like a bold new chapter. It doesn't feel like standing on a cliff in a wide-brimmed hat looking thoughtfully into the distance. More often, it begins as friction, a quiet irritation, a subtle restlessness, a sense that something in your life technically works, but it's starting to cost you more than it used to. So many of us are waiting for reinvention to announce itself as inspiration. The clouds parting, the swelling music from the string section. But in my experience, reinvention begins when the life that you build with so much effort, it starts to feel like it was designed for a previous version of you. And that's where the arguing starts. Who am I to want something different? Why can't I just be grateful? Other people would love to have this life, but gratitude does not automatically mean alignment. You can be grateful for what a chapter gave you and still know that you are no longer meant to live inside it. That's what I had to come to terms with before I left medicine. It wasn't a dramatic scene where I placed my stethoscope on the desk and whispered, "My work here is done." It was a steady accumulation of friction, a growing gap between the role that I was in and the person that I was becoming. It's one thing to outgrow a life that is obviously falling apart. It is much harder to outgrow a life that still looks good on paper. Friction is the early warning signal that a future regret is forming. It's not telling you to blow up your life tomorrow. Please do not send this to your spouse with the subject line, "Kim said that I should move to Portugal," but it is worth listening to. Very often, the first reinvention is not an external decision. It's the moment that you stop dismissing the signal. You stop calling your deeper desire selfish just because it inconveniences the old version of your life. And you begin to ask a better question. Not, what is wrong with me for wanting something different? But what is this friction trying to show me? Because once you're willing to notice that, you're already in the process. The second thing I learned is that most people are not stuck because they lack information. When it comes to health, most people know the basics. They know that vegetables are involved. They know sleep matters. They know that stress is not generally improved by answering emails at 11:42 p.m. while standing in the kitchen eating crackers. This is not the mysterious part. You may know that you want to start the business, or leave the job, or write the book. You may have done the research and watched the videos and made the spreadsheet. You may have a notes app full of plans and a friend who is very supportive but now visibly tired of hearing about this same decision. And still, you are not moving. When that happens, most people turn on themselves. I must be lazy. I must not want it badly enough. I'm just someone who never follows through. But the more that I dug into the research, the less convincing that explanation became. Because so often, the problem is not a lack of desire or intelligence or strategy. The problem is that the new behavior threatens the old identity. This is the core of what Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy called immunity to change. The idea that people can genuinely want to change while also having hidden commitments that keep them attached to the status quo. Someone might say, I want to be more visible, while underneath, carrying a hidden commitment to avoiding criticism. Someone might say, I want to reinvent my career, while underneath being committed to being seen as sensible, reliable, and not the sort of person who suddenly does inconvenient things like follow a calling. When you understand this, self-sabotage looks very different. It is not always a failure of willpower. Sometimes it's a protection strategy, a part of you trying to preserve belonging and safety, or the identity that once helped you survive or succeed. This is why more information often doesn't solve the problem. The barrier it's not intellectual, it's identity-based. And once you see that identity layer, question changes. It's no longer simply, what should I do? The deeper question becomes, who would I have to become for this to feel natural? That is a much more powerful question because you are challenging a self-concept, and human beings do not casually or easily give up their old, familiar answer to the question, who am I? Even limiting identities can feel safe. Even roles that exhaust us can still give us belonging and predictability and approval. This is why your old identity may not simply step aside and say, wonderful, I see we're evolving. I'll just gather my things. It will negotiate, it will delay, it will suggest that perhaps this is not the right time, that you should wait until you are more confident, more prepared, more mysteriously transformed into someone with a cleaner inbox. Because if you are stuck, it may not be because you need another piece of advice. It may be because some part of you still believes that the change you want will cost you something that you are not yet ready to lose. And once you see that, you can stop bullying yourself into change. Instead, you can begin where the real work is, at the level of identity. The third thing that I learned is that self-image decides what feels realistic. This is one of those things that feels really obvious once you see it, but until you see it, it is running the whole show from backstage, wearing black and holding a clipboard. Most of us like to think we make decisions based on logic, weighing the pros and the cons and being practical. But very often, underneath the practical explanation, there is a deeper filter operating. What feels possible for someone like me? And this is where so many reinventions stall, because the dream may be exciting, but if it doesn't match your current self-image, some part of you will just file it under not realistic. Your self-image will say, yes, lovely idea. Unfortunately, we are not that kind of person. That phrase, that kind of person, it's so revealing. We use it all the time. I'm not the kind of person who speaks on stages. I'm not the kind of person who starts a business. I'm not the kind of person who changes her life at this age. We often dress this up as realism, but it is identity. It is an old picture of ourselves trying to predict the limits of our future. Self-image doesn't just influence what you do, it influences what feels like you. And we are far more likely to repeat behaviors that feel like us. If every healthy choice feels like pretending to be one of those people, eventually you will want to take the costume off. But when the self-image begins to shift, the behavior becomes easier to sustain. Identity changes the emotional load, whether the action feels like a battle against yourself or an expression of who you are becoming. I could see this in my own reinvention. When I first started sharing publicly online, I did not have a self-image as a YouTuber or a public figure. I was a doctor, then an entrepreneur, then a writer, and then slowly, awkwardly, with many moments of, what exactly am I doing with my face on camera? I began to build evidence for a new identity. That's the part that people often miss. We think that the identity has to arrive fully formed before we act. We think confidence comes first, clarity comes first, certainty comes first. But very often the feeling comes later. The self-image updates through evidence. You act in small, uncomfortable ways, you survive it, you repeat it, and then slowly what once felt impossible starts to feel plausible, then ordinary, then yours. So instead of only asking, what do I want? It helps to ask, what kind of person would naturally move toward this? What would feel normal to that person? What would they stop negotiating with? Now, if this is already feeling a little uncomfortably familiar, if there is something that you say you want, but you keep delaying it, avoiding it, or somehow mysteriously getting in your own way, I created a free guide that will help. It's called the Self-Sabotage Recovery Guide, and it's designed to help you to identify all those hidden patterns underneath the pattern. You can download it for free. I will link it below. And that brings me to the next thing that writing this book has taught me. Reinvention is not just behavior change, it is identity rehearsal. Most of us approach change by trying to force a new behavior while continuing to rehearse the old identity. We try to become more visible while still thinking, I'm not the kind of person who puts herself out there. We try to take better care of ourselves while still treating our own needs as optional, negotiable, or only allowed after everyone else has been fully sorted, emotionally supported, and fed. And then we wonder why it feels so hard. But of course it feels hard because the behavior is trying to move in one direction while the identity is still pulling in another. It's like trying to drive with the parking brake on and then blaming yourself for not being more efficient. This is where a lot of the traditional habit advice feels incomplete. I love systems and tracking and checklists. Honestly, a good checklist is basically a love language. But if the system does not address the self-image, it may only work while motivation is high. And motivation is famously unreliable. Motivation is like that friend who says, we should absolutely get together soon, and then disappears for 4 months. You cannot build an entire reinvention around waiting for motivation to text you back. At some point, the behavior has to become connected to who you are becoming. That is what I mean by identity rehearsal. Every time that you take an action that aligns with the person that you're becoming, you're giving your brain a small experience of, this is something that I do now. This is how I treat myself now. This is what I no longer negotiate. The action matters, yes, but the meaning of the action matters too. A 10-minute walk is not just a 10-minute walk if you have spent years seeing yourself as someone who never follows through. It can become evidence. A single page of writing is not just a single page if you have spent years telling yourself you're not really a writer. Evidence is what begins to update identity. Slowly, through repetition, through seeing yourself behave in ways that contradict the old story. You do not always get the full map before you start. Sometimes you get the next 10 feet. Sometimes you get friction. Sometimes you get one tiny burst of aliveness around something that makes absolutely no logical sense yet. And the temptation is to dismiss it because it's not a plan. But maybe it's not supposed to be a plan yet. Maybe what you're supposed to do is simply practice and let things unfold. Identity is a lot more practical than people realize. It shapes what feels normal, what feels safe to you, what you permit yourself to want, and what you keep postponing. So when you begin rehearsing a new identity, you are practicing a new normal. That is where transformation becomes durable. Okay, let's move on to the next lesson that I learned, and you're really not going to like this one, but I need you to stick with me. It's this. Clarity usually comes after you start to move. I know this is deeply inconvenient. Most of us would really prefer clarity to arrive first, ideally in a clean, elegant download, a little life memo. Dear Kim, here are the exact steps, the timeline, the projected emotional turbulence, and confirmation that no one is going to judge you. That would be lovely. Unfortunately, that is not how clarity usually works. Most of the time, clarity is not the thing that appears before you begin. It's what begins to form because you are in motion. You try something. You notice what happens. You learn what was fear, what was wisdom, and what was simply your old identity trying to keep everything familiar. This was very true while writing this book. I did not sit down on day one with the entire architecture perfectly formed. I started with a direction, with questions, with stories from medicine and my own life. And as I wrote, the book began to teach me what it was really about. That is one of the strangest things about writing. You think that you are organizing your thoughts, and then your thoughts start organizing you. It's a little odd, but it works. The same was true of every reinvention that I've been through. Leaving medicine did not begin with a perfect plan. Starting YouTube did not begin with me feeling like a natural on camera. Each of those big projects started with me just taking the next step, and then the next. And each step started to reveal something. This is why waiting for clarity can become a very sophisticated form of avoidance. It sounds really wise. I just need more clarity. I need to figure out the full plan first. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes you do need to pause or let an idea mature. But there is a difference between discernment and delay. When you practice discernment, there is movement and action baked into it. Delay has looping. Most people who think that they are waiting for clarity are actually waiting for emotional certainty. They are waiting for the fear to disappear or the old identity to fully approve the new one. And that may never happen. The old identity does not usually approve of your reinvention in advance. There is no official letter coming, no congratulations, you may now become bigger than the role that we previously assigned you. At some point, you have to move before the old self-image is fully on board. And that movement does not need to be reckless. It can be small and honestly kind of experimental and reversible. It could be just one conversation or one application, but it needs to create evidence because without evidence, your brain has nothing new to work with. It just kind of keeps recycling the old story. This is why small experiments are so useful. So that could look like if you want to improve your health, asking yourself, what happens if for 2 weeks I act like someone who is training for something? If it's about visibility, ask yourself, what happens if I share one idea publicly every week for a month? Experiments lower the pressure. They let you move without demanding that you know the entire destination. And beginning itself has identity power. Once you have started, the internal conversation changes. Before you start, the question is, can I do this? Which invites your old identity to hold a committee meeting with many grumbling concerns. After you start, the question becomes, how do I keep going? And that is a much better question. It assumes movement because you are already in relationship with the new identity. So if you are waiting for clarity, ask yourself what kind you're waiting for. If we're talking practical clarity, like a next step, a piece of information, a financial number, that's worth getting. But if you are waiting for the kind of clarity that removes all fear, all uncertainty, and all possibility of growing in public, that's not clarity. That's a fantasy of control. It's seductive, but it's not where reinvention happens. Okay, that brings me to the final lesson I learned, which is a really great tactic to use when your ideal new identity just feels way too out of reach. Because when you're crossing from an old identity into a new one, you often need what I think of as a bridge identity. One of the reasons reinvention feels so destabilizing is that the old identity no longer fits, but the new one doesn't feel fully believable yet. You're somewhere here in the middle, and if you try to leap straight from the old identity to the fully realized new one, your system may reject it. It may feel too big, too fake, too much like pretending. If you have spent years seeing yourself as someone who never sticks with exercise, suddenly declaring, I am now an extremely fit person, may feel like too much of a stretch. Your brain may respond with, interesting, based on what? Which is a bit rude, but fair. If you have identified for years as the responsible, sensible one who doesn't make disruptive changes, then an identity statement, I am someone who radically reinvents her life, may feel less like empowerment and more like you need to sit down and have a cup of tea. A bridge identity doesn't demand that you fully believe the final version yet. It simply gives you something believable to practice right now. So instead of, I am a completely transformed person, the bridge identity might be, I am someone who is learning to follow through. Instead of, I am a confident public speaker, it might be, I am someone who is practicing being heard. Instead of, I am wildly disciplined, it might be, I am someone who keeps small promises to themselves. The bridge identity lowers the psychological threat. It says, we're not asking you to become an entirely different person by Thursday, which is good because Thursday is pretty busy. It says, we are simply practicing the next version. The bridge identity also gives you a different interpretation when things wobble. Without it, any imperfection can feel like proof that the old identity was right. You miss one workout and the old identity says, see, you never stick with things. But the bridge identity says, I am someone learning to follow through. So one missed workout is not a collapse. It is a moment to practice returning. One awkward post is not evidence that you should hide. It's part of the rehearsal. One messy page is not a failure. It's the work. So here is a question I would love for you to sit with. And if you're willing, share your answer in the comments. Finish this sentence. I'm becoming someone who... It can be small, bold, or slightly terrifying. Those are usually the good ones because naming the bridge identity is itself a first act of reinvention. You are giving language to the person that you are becoming. And once you have language, you have something to practice. So here is what I kept coming back to as I wrote this book. The deepest reinvention is not just changing what your life looks like from the outside. It's changing the way that you relate to yourself on the inside. It's becoming harder to abandon, harder to talk yourself out of what you know, harder to shrink back into the old role, and harder to keep postponing the thing that has been asking for your attention for years. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. It's time to stop abandoning the part of you that already knows that something is asking to change. Because your next chapter is probably going to begin with friction, restlessness. One small experiment, one moment where you choose not to go back to sleep inside a life that no longer fits. And maybe that's the real work, finally becoming loyal to the person that you were always trying to become. If this resonated, the next video that I would watch is called The Hidden Script Running Your Life. And that video is going to help you to identify the invisible story that may be shaping your choices, your patterns, and the version of yourself that you keep returning to even when you're trying to move forward. I will link it on the next screen and then I will see you there. Okay. Oh, I'm just going to stretch for a second. Oh, okay. Wonderful. I see we're evolving. I'll just gather my things. I like that joke, but I think I kind of rushed it. Okay. So I'm going to try to get